Hello, I want to give a short presentation to introduce the concept of values and significance in order to help you to make your watch list and prioritize your sites based on the level of significance. In preserving archaeological sites and heritage places, it is important to identify and understand values and what they represent. In the cycle of heritage management and conservation, value assessment is one of the important steps. So the first one is the recording and documentation. So to know what you're recording, the heritage archaeology that you are documenting, and then to be able, the second step is to assess, and assessment is for the condition, for context, and also for the value in order to get then to the last step to identify responses, different conservation and preservation strategies, and prioritize and implement them. So value is an important part of this process, and that is mainly because we protect what we value. Values are central to conservation and decision making, but it's not, and they're not the only factors, of course, to be accounted for. And I wanted just to make sure that it's very important to identify them, but as one factor affecting the whole process of conservation and heritage management. Assigning values are not an easy thing to do, and there are different reasons for that. One is that values are not stable and it's changing over time. We as people are assigning value to heritage. So as we change and value changes, the value that we assign to heritage also changes with that. Assigning values is neither an easy nor a rapid task. Different people and communities with different beliefs and ideas define and assign values differently, which makes the process of value assessment a challenging and debatable task. And also these different people, sometimes they have conflicting values that they identify, and they are identified by conflicting stakeholders. Why we do this value assignment then? As I said, first we protect what we value, and it's very difficult to identify conservation and intervention actions and to prioritize them without knowing having an estimation of the values. And in restoration phases and sometimes in recovery phase, the values and in some cases the remaining aspects of values will heavily influence the decisions and responses. So we need to understand values and significance. So understanding cultural significance comes first, and then we can develop conservation and conservation plans and priorities, and based on those we can put management of the place in accordance with the policy in place and come up with responses. So how we do that? Heritage is considered significance for different reasons, and in order to understand the significance, set categories of values has been developed over years. There are many examples of these value lists or typologies, and here I only have few examples in this slide of some examples of widely accepted categories of value. And so the first one is from Australia ICOMOS Borough Charter, and Borough Charter is one of the first and most important guidelines defining cultural heritage values, which puts the identification and understanding of significance as a first step before developing any policies and management plans. Next is from an important work done from Randall Mason and Erica Avrami in 2000, which puts value assessment at the core of heritage management. And they, in their work done in 2000, identified these categories of historical, artistic, social, civic, spiritual, religious, symbolic, identity, research, natural, and economic as different categories of values. In the Conservation Principles, Policies and Guidance, published by Historic England, they define 4 categories of significance: evidential, historical, aesthetic, communal, which communal includes commemorative and symbolic values, social values, and spiritual values. And then I wanted also to talk about the next one, which is by Almaip in 2019, which talks about the preservation value. And that I'm going to talk about a bit more of how some of these values that could be seen as not inherent heritage value, such as preservation or condition, could become part of these value assessments, or could be seen as sort of extra criteria that you need to have in mind when you're doing your value assessment. And the last one is an example from Mega Jordan, National Inventory or Database for Inventory of Sites in Jordan, which, based on mainly borough charters, identifies these categories of values that I have here. So what are the problems with these categories of kind of more traditional way of looking at value assessment? In value assessment should provide a more broader understanding of values. And one problem when you're using this list of value is that it doesn't provide this broader understanding of values and what part of archaeology is carrying those values. Another issue that's still unaddressed in this sort of value assessment is that this value assessment should reflect changing nature of heritage and should address how past value assessments relate to today's values. And neither of the typologies address the issue of time and changing nature of heritage. And it should include different stakeholders' value and not only experts' value. And this is implied sometimes by the use of terminology. Maybe we should, there is a need to use of a different terminology to include both experts and non-experts' values. And another point is to address a concept of heritage values versus other values. Site and heritage places carry both heritage values and other values that some call societal or instrumental values, such as economic, social, environmental values. And it's not possible to do value assessment and prioritization and make a conservation and management plan for heritage in just having heritage values in isolation from any of these other or outside of the heritage values. In order to have this broad understanding or include this broad understanding of heritage values, the Raymond Lemmer International Center for Conservation at Leuven University developed a grid-based approach to calculate or to evaluate values based on Article 13 of NARA document on authenticity. And NARA document is a document that addresses a broader understanding and an assessment of value and authenticity of cultural heritage, especially in relation to conservation. And what I mean here by broader understanding is that, for example, it helped to introduce the value of craftsmanship to Western approach to preservation, in which conservation of original material and fabric used to have a higher value and importance. In the NARA grid, from one side, which is based on the NARA document, that in the NARA document they talk about linking values to different sources of information. And sources of information can be seen as different attributes of heritage. So in NARA grid, it does the same thing. It takes from one side and looks at these different attributes, or what they call aspects of heritage, from both in form, material, design, and so it doesn't look just at the fabric of the place, and also it enforces to look at the heritage within its setting and surrounding. So it looks at the location and setting of the heritage, as opposed to focusing only on the site and the building and its boundary. Also, it looks at the use and function, and one of the aspects is the use and function here, use and function of the place, and elaborates each values for the use. By having these different attributes and aspects of heritage and elaborating each value typology for them, it allows to take into consideration and understand how changes are likely to affect significance. And in order to go further into assigning values, a weighing system is also important. To have a weighing system needs to be adopted on how to rank values and values that's been assigned to heritage. This is a work done by Fredheim and Khalaf in 2016, and in their work they divide this value assessment process into 3 different stages. In stage 1, they call it the features, where the features of significance is identified. So the answer to the question of what is heritage, so what are the heritage attributes. And this is based on the work done by Stevenson, which it tries to break with more traditional typologies in an attempt to more fully capture how heritage is perceived by different stakeholders, both experts and non-experts. They or she divides heritage into 3 different concepts of forms. So tangible, what is tangible, design, material, and physical aspects of heritage. Relationships, it's about meaning and interpretation, and the relationships between human and the heritage, and the practices about the tradition, activities, and events. And stage 2, they talk about the aspects of value, or what we call the typology, different typology and classification of value, to answer the question of why heritage is valuable. And the categories that they use in their values, categorization of values, are it's break into 4: associative, sensory, evidentiary, and functional. And what I want to emphasize here that is the use of the terminology, which is tried to use the terms that are not try to use terms that can be applied and used by both experts and non-experts, such as associative instead of historical or traditional, evidentiary instead of scientific, and also try to avoid using Western biased terms such as and instead they used sensory. The use of terms to capture how heritage is perceived by all stakeholders, both experts and non-experts. And the third stage, where the qualifiers of value is defined, and those are the things or external effects this value assessment. So, and it helps to understand or evaluate how valuable is the heritage. And these are criteria such as rarity, authenticity, and condition. There are, however, still problems with these, which are very more advanced way of doing this value assessment and all these different criteria having in mind. And that is how to address issue of heritage values versus other values or anything, the external values. And these values could be tourism, and economic and development values, also economic gain of heritage, importance of identity to local people and social justice, political conflict and reconciliation, etc. So in a more contemporary way of looking at conservation and value assessment, from one side, these values are complementary, one centered on heritage and the values, inherent values of heritage, and the other one are more societal values and this other or external values. And why they're important is that it is not possible to do a value assessment and prioritization and to plan for conservation and mitigation or plan for management of a site in isolation, only looking at these heritage values without looking at the other or societal values such as economic, social, environmental. A conservation plan that have only a conservation plan when having economic and tourism potential of a site in mind will be different and conflicting with a plan that it doesn't have those criteria in mind and only looks at the conservation of the site itself. To address this issue, in a recent work done again by Mason and Avrami in 2019, they talk about this issue of, or these two aspects of heritage values from one side and from also it could be seen as essential value or more societal, other or instrumental values. And the two perspectives differ in how they frame the outcome of the process of heritage conservation and management. And in the diagram that they show in their article is that they talk about the first one. When you look at the heritage values, more traditional way of looking at value in the process of heritage management, that you identify value based on those, you plan mitigation or intervention activities and implement them. And in that case, the conservation of heritage of sites is the main goal, and it might in the end suggest social benefits as an outcome of it. But if you were looking at putting this more societal values at the center of the value assessment, in that case, heritage and its conservation is seen as a mean to different social ends, from economic gain to social justice, etc. So this is an important thing to have in mind also when we do this value assessment of what are these different criteria that we need to have in mind. And one way to look at these are that these are of this other or external or societal values are the criteria that they're affecting heritage values, and such as I said, tourism or economic gain, social justice, and things like also accessibility of sites, and anything that makes a site more accessible to people, to tourism, etc. In total, when we're looking at the significance and how to do this significance assessment, the questions that you want to answer is that what is the heritage in question in order to identify different attributes and different features of the heritage, why the heritage in question is valued, and the different value classification and typologies, and level of each value if identified, that how what is the level of each of these identified values for different attributes that you identify for your heritage. And of course, to have in mind both with using typologies and having different people involved in the process, is the having in mind that by whom these values are identified, and it's important for who. And how important and valuable is the heritage, so degree of overall significance, and what are these criteria or the other criteria affecting the identified values, as I said, such as accessibility, tourism. Here I wanted to talk to you about summary of significance and EAMENA. As you know, in EAMENA we don't identify values and we don't do significance for the sites that we record. However, for your work and to prepare your watch list, we ask you to give us a level of significance of the sites that you're recording. And that's the reason I wanted to give you this presentation or short talk on what are the criteria or different criteria you need to have in mind when you do your when you identify the significance of the sites, and in the end identify the level of the significance. In the database, just for you to know, there is a place where you can record the summary of significance. And by summary of significance, and significance is the sum of all the values and encompasses the overall importance of heritage place that you're recording. So when you go to resource summary, card, description, assignment, there is a field that you can choose at what kind of description you're adding to your site, and from there you can choose summary of significance, and this is the place that has a free text, and you can add a summary of all the values and significance of the site. For the watch list, we ask you to tell us what is the level of significance. There are different studies done on how to give this level of significance, or how to identify the level of significance for the sites. And I wanted again to say that the value identification and segment of significance sets out the kind and importance of a heritage place. A ranking system identifies the level of significance that goes further to help decision makers to prioritize and better decide. These are few examples and the first one is the conservation plan published by National Trust of Australia, where they identified the level of significance based on exceptional significance, considerable significance, some, and little. And the second one is from Council of Europe, and the levels are internationally important, of outstanding national importance, of special national interest, of regional or local importance. So the emphasis is on whether the significance of a place is at international level, national or regional or local. And another one and that I wanted to mention here is more or less recent work from 2013 from Isakhan, where he uses mainly the categories defined by the Conservation Plan and National Trust, and adds few categories of unknown and known. What we chose and added for your in your watch list table to choose from to identify the level of significance is a combination of these examples that I outlined here. If you're interested, you can contact your training manager and I can send you more information about all of these studies that I've been mentioning in this presentation. So as you have in your activity sheet, we want you to define the level of significance based on these five different levels of exceptional, and that you talk about heritage places of exceptional and or international significance. These could be the sites that are either are World Heritage Sites, or they're on the list to become or World Heritage Sites, or your Department of Antiquities thinks that these sites should become World Heritage Sites, let's say. Next level is the considerable heritage places of considerable and or national significance, as importance of the sites in the country at the national level. Moderate heritage places of some significance, important at regional or local level, either individually or for group significance. And the next one is limited, and these are heritage places of limited significance, and unknown for the heritage places of unknown significance, resulting from a lack of sufficient information. I understand that this is a complicated subject, needs more time, more courses and training on, but I try to address at least few issues and also different criteria that you need to have in mind when you want to talk about value assessment and when you want to do a summary of significance. Again, if you have any questions, you know that you can contact your training manager, and you can ask us either on Facebook or email or WhatsApp different questions that you might have. And as I said, I can provide more information about different sources that I talked about as part of this presentation. Thank you.